Discipuli salvete, hierete mathites. Welcome to another episode of Medical Greek and Latin. This is lesson 11, and we're going to be staying with Greek, actually, not just for this video, but for at least the next 3 or 4. I have several big batches of root words to uh, send your way, so if you're waiting for the Latin, be patient. It is coming. All right, let's get started. So we get to our familiar grid here, and we'll start with the word arachne, arachne, if you're learning that pronunciation. And the combining form is very similar, and you've probably already figured out that this means spider or web, although there is a different word in Greek for web, histos, like histogram or something like that. In medicine, this is often used for arachnoid membranes, things that are spider-like. A lot of animals are used in the naming in science. We have a hippocampus, which resembles the seahorse. The Greek word for seahorse is hippokambos, and there are others. And of course, we've talked about cancer already. We have chloros, chlor, and this means green. And we get things like chlorophyll, which we've certainly all learned about before, chlorine, chloroplast. Okay, so that chlor has to do with like a pale green. Next, we have an interesting one, chondros, and the combining form there is without the os. Those of you who've studied Greek might be thinking of something that has to do with something that is fat or thick. And this is actually, or it could be used for cartilage. The hypochondrium, if you know that, is this soft place kind of in the abdomen. Um, there are a couple of organs near there, like the pancreas and things like that. And the that was believed to be in antiquity where people felt sadness. So when you had this physical reaction to sadness or melancholy, it, they believed that it was felt most keenly in the hypochondrium, in this area that I'm talking about, this soft part of the abdomen. So over time, the meaning has changed, and if you're a hypochondriac, although these days we might think of somebody who worries too much, but if we go by the original Greek words, it's one who's just overly sad or overly melancholy. Mitochondrion, and remember those on words pluralized to an A, mitochondria. Okay, and we'll see other words that have chondr, but in Greek, especially in modern Greek, if somebody says είσαι chondros, they're just saying, hey, you're fat. Next we have dactylos, dactyl, and we get finger here. So we'll have things like clinodactyly, when you see people who have crooked fingers. We have combylodactyly, pterodactyl, the flying animal from the age of the dinosaurs that had wings that stretched all the way out to what resembled fingers. Ptero is a wing in Greek. And for those of you who are English majors or who study poetry, dactylic hexameter is a way of measuring syllables using what are called dactyls, these little finger, um, these groups of syllables that resembled fingers, the joints and bones of fingers. So dactylic hexameter would have 6 of these finger sets per line. Next, we have Helkos. This is one that I'm guessing many people will not know. This is where we get the word ulcer, and you can see the LC or the LK there in its root. Hydros, this is a very, very often confused one. And we have seen it before in one of the early lessons. This is sweat, and even I, many years ago, confused this with hydro, HYDR, which is liquid or water. It's actually water, and sweat kind of resembling water. You can see how these would be confused. You won't confuse them though if you remember that the word hydro has an epsilon or a y, whereas this one here has an I, and in Greek that would be a iota. So hydrono, I sweat. Next we have histos. I've mentioned this one already. This is the spider's web. It's also used for web tissue. Some of you in school may have learned how to read a histogram before. And an istoselida in modern Greek is a web page. Next we have idor and idatos, and this is the aforementioned hydro, the water or the fluid. And next we have hypnos or hypnos, and there's your combining form, and you get sleep when you try to lull somebody into a kind of sleep. You are hypnotizing them. You're putting them into a form of sleep. We can leave it there without going too deeply into that. And in modern Greek, if somebody says you are smart, they would say ise ex hypnos. Hey, you are out of sleep. You're awake. And if somebody said you were awake, they meant that you were smart. You were on the ball. You were paying attention. And this, of course, carries over into other idioms and expressions. When somebody does something that probably should have been thought about more, we tell them, hey, come on, wake up. Okay, we tell them to get smart. Next, we have ikteros. This is also one that's probably not easy to figure out. Ikter, and this just means jaundice. We could talk a lot about that one. Isos, and the combining form is is or iso, means equal. The one that immediately comes to mind is the isosceles triangle, which has two equal sides. Next we have mis or mios, and this is mouse or muscle. These are doublets, two words, one word that has two meanings. And I think I mentioned this in a recent video. When somebody told you to make a mouse, basically they were telling you to flex your muscle. Let me see that mouse that's in your arm, that bicep. And a lot of times we'll use the Latin musculus, which is where we get our muscle. So the word muscle is a very important one, obviously, when studying the body. Yes, and there's a strong mouse for you. You can post the name of this guy if you know who it is. Next, we have Mykis and Myketos. So MYC is the mushroom or the fungus. And staying with the confusing we have mylos or milos. And this is bone marrow or spinal cord. Next we have narki, narc, stupor or numbness, and we can easily summon the word narcotic, or a person who's a narc is a narcotics officer. When there are people out there who have a weakness for numbing themselves, they probably use some kind of narcotic to do that. Next we have necros, Necr, and this one means death. This is an interesting one. In ancient Greece, a cemetery, not a secretary, a cemetery was called a necropolis, a city of the dead. So that's what the graveyard would have been called. And as Greeks discarded their old pagan religion, that Olympian belief, the belief in the Olympian gods, and it became a Christian society, They stopped calling it a city of the dead because there was no belief in death, and they started calling it a kimitirion. Well, kimame is I sleep, so a kimitirion was the place of sleep, and it's where we get the word cemetery, which means a sleeping place. So kimesis is a dormition or a falling asleep. Um, and I think that's pretty interesting also. I didn't know when I was learning Greek years ago that cemetery uh, was a Greek word. All right, let's move on. Oligos is olig. Modern Greek speakers will know ligo, ligo meaning a little. English speakers will know what an oligarchy is, a rule by the few. Okay, so oligos means few or deficient. Onyx, onychos, onich is the fingernail or the toenail. And students of Greek may know what a nichi is. Nichi is a nail. Okay, and we move on now to polios. And our combining form is poly, not to be confused with Poly. And this is gray matter of the brain and spinal cord. Many of us have probably heard of polio, the full name of which is poliomyelitis, okay, which is an inflammation of that gray matter of the spinal cord. Next, we have polis, or if you want the ancient Greek, it's polus. And this is your poly, which just means many or excessive. This one gets mixed with lots of other forms. People who have many loves, many partners, many lovers, I should say, are called polyamorous, which is kind of strange using the Greek poly and the Latin amorous. They probably should have gone with multi-amorous or polyphile or something like that, keeping the Greek with the Greek and the Latin with the Latin, but these are often mixed these days. Okay, next we have psyche, which is where we get psych, and this is the soul or the mind. When you pick up a textbook on psychology, you will normally see the first letter psi, which some people call psi, okay, and it just represents these two here. And if you're a sci-fi fan and watched Babylon 5 as I did, you certainly will know the Psi Corps, okay, this group of people with strong mental abilities. Okay, but I won't get into that here. Next, soma, somatos. A few combining forms there. It just means the body. So we could combine those two, psyche and soma, and come up with psychosomatic, things that pertain to the mind and body. Next we have stenos, which is strength. If somebody is asthenos, asthenis in Greek, they are weak. Next, we go to xanthos, which you probably already know this. The X is often pronounced as a Z, so instead of xylophono, we get xylophone. We don't say xylophone. And this very simply means yellow. And it has also come to mean blonde. And finally, we have pous or podos, and our combining form, or I should say one of them, is pod, and this is leg or foot. This is a good time to talk about the letter O, or the omicron in Greek. We have this interesting thing that happens in languages, especially in Greek, where O and E are always short vowels and they're often interchangeable. By that I mean there are words that started off being spelled with an omicron that somehow wound up with an epsilon in there, and vice versa. So for those of you who take ancient Greek, these are the only two vowels that never get the perispomenon, that circumflex, because they're short vowels, there's no way to elongate them. And you wind up with things like this, pod and ped. So the podiatrist, okay, and the pedestrian share the same root, pods and peds. All that's changed is the O and the E. An orthopedic, an arthropod, a pedal, a pedestal. Okay, and another example are your gons and gens. A gonad, there's another term from the 80s. What are you doing, you gonad? A gonad is a reproductive organ, but we can also see the GEN where we get things like Genesis and genitalia and things like that, and even oxygen. So that's something to keep in mind, that O and E are weak vowels, and it will not be unusual to see them trade places. All right, moving right along, and I'm not going to do too many of these today because there are just so many words to cover. Um, I think I'll only do 3 of them here. Let's take a look at this, and if you've been following along, you know how I do this. We have achlorohydria, which we will break up. And we know that the A, that alpha privative means not, chlor is green, and hydria has to do with water. Well, this one you probably don't need Greek as long as you know your chemistry, and if you know what HCl is, if you know what hydrochloric acid is, you'll figure this one out. Achlorhydria is just a lack of hydrochloric acid in the stomach. That's all it is. So this one probably will not require a huge knowledge of Greek because we learned this one in chemistry. Next, we have dermatomycosis. Well, we know that derma is skin, and Mike, as we found out today, is fungus or mushroom, and osis is a condition. It could also be an infection. So, dermatomycosis is a skin infection caused by fungus. That's it. And we can, once we parse the word into its component parts, we can see that it has something to do with skin. It has something to do with a condition or an infection, and it's got something to do with a fungus. No matter how long these get, our method is always the same. We're going to break the words up no matter how long they are and figure them out. Here we have the daunting oligoerythrocythemia. Not a problem. Oligo we know is few. Erythro is the Greek word for red, or one of them. And we have cell there. And HEM pertains to the blood. So here we have an insufficient number of red blood cells. Oligoerythrocythemia. It takes a while to learn them. It takes even longer to learn how to say them. And again, here's another even longer one. The only thing scary about these is getting them. It's actually contracting these conditions, these diseases. Everything else is just learning the word and learning how to say it and what it means. Here we have polioencephalomyelitis. And you know what we're going to do, right? I'm going to pause the video here and give you the chance not to go to Bing or some search engine to look it up, but to go back through your notes and see if you can figure out what this might pertain to. So I'm not going to give you the roots here. I'm going to parse the word for you, but you're going to have to label these and figure them out. And if you've done it, you know that this is an inflammation of the gray matter of the brain and spinal cord and of the meninges. So there you go. Very, very long word, lots of syllables, but there's also a lot of meaning packed in there. Sometimes it's easy to understand patients' frustration when doctors use medical terminology because the average person won't know these. That's it for another lesson. I know I've thrown a lot at you over the past 7 to 10 days, and it's a little difficult to keep up. Hopefully, you're keeping really good notes and reviewing, and you'll be ready for the next batch of words, which I'll post soon. Delos!